Let's be honest, the internet is not that fun anymore. And this isn't just something that I've been saying. You may have heard of the phrase dead internet theory that claims, amongst a lot of other things, that the internet has effectively been taken over by bots, that the majority of online content is created by bots and that human activity is actually pretty minimal. The basic form of this statement definitely feels quite true. If you've been on Facebook lately, you've likely seen the pictures of AI Jesus that have dominated the platform. On YouTube, you've definitely seen these kinds of scam comments. And for some users on the internet, they've been able to literally prove that the person that they're interacting with is a bot, such as this user who was able to trick this bot into actually exposing itself. This gets worse when we realize that cybersecurity firms themselves have come to the conclusion that bots in general now make up nearly half of all internet traffic globally. We've almost reached the point where bot activity is going to outweigh human activity. And granted, a good percentage of these bots are actually like good bots, right? Like web crawlers who allow search engines to work. But a decent chunk of this activity is done by bots that are designed to steal, to misinform, or to scam, effectively. Either way, there's no doubt that the internet fundamentally feels different in recent years. This is a nuanced topic though. There's a lot of conspiracy, there's a lot of fact. And I kind of want us to get to a more reasonable understanding of what's actually happening here. Is the internet dying? Are bots taking over? What's going on? If you are already familiar with dead internet theory, you have likely seen a definition similar to the one I just told you. This idea that bots are generating the majority of the content on the internet and it's going to lead to this like desolate wasteland. This is the common contemporary definition, but the original one is actually a bit more wild. It originates from a website that seems to find me at my lowest points. An archived version of the original theory is actually available on a different forum. It was called Dead Internet Theory, Most of the Internet is Fake, by a user named Illuminati Pirate. And I'm not kidding when I say this version is absolute lunacy. I'll skip you the 10,000 words of slurs and give you their own summary of what dead internet theory really is. Large proportions of the supposedly human-produced content on the internet are actually generated by artificial intelligence networks in conjunction with paid secret media influencers in order to manufacture consumers for an increasing range of newly normalized cultural products. What this person means, if you read a bit more of it, is basically that it's like a government scheme to take over people's minds. Like many other conspiracy theories, it does the thing of mixing truths with falsehoods quite liberally and leaving us to disentangle the truth. Personally, I don't think it's a mind control experiment by OpenAI to get my genetic code. Because it's not just me and you who struggle to actually get to the truth about this. Some of the world's richest and most powerful people can't really get answers on this. You might not remember, but just a couple of years ago, everyone's favorite Twitter influencer, Elon Musk, tried to get out the deal of buying Twitter by arguing that there were way more bots than had been previously suggested on Twitter. It's rare for he and I to agree, but this time he was actually probably right. Because if you didn't keep up with this story, Twitter came to the conclusion that 5% of their users were bots. They were not willing to let any outside party have a look and investigate for themselves. And they were not willing to implement another method to estimate the number of bots. 5 seems low. Yeah, 5% does seem low. And Twitter does have a historic problem with not actually knowing how many people are using the website. They famously miscounted their daily users for 3 years straight. And, I don't have to remind you how the story ended, but basically, Elon said he'd get rid of bots. He didn't get rid of the bots, obviously. And the problem got worse, and Twitter's down 72% since he bought it, whatever. But there are good reasons why this information is being held so secret and is being so tightly guarded. Why not just me and you can't find out how many bots are on the internet, but people with power can't find out either. Part of the reason is, simply down to the fact that the whole revenue model of social media platforms relies ultimately on advertising. And over the last few years, the global ad spend has been rising and rising more and more every year. I think we're all pretty familiar with this. Adverts are run on content, and these platforms make money when people click on the ads. However, platforms aren't that interested in whether real users are interacting with ads or whether bot users are interacting with ads. In fact, they're only interested once their advertisers start to notice that there are too many bots on a platform. The optimal world for a social media platform is to have the maximum possible bot activity that doesn't get noticed by an advertiser, because it means effectively that they make money on fake ad clicks. And this might sound like a bit of a conspiracy, right? That the platforms are, in on it in quotes. But fraudulent ad clicks and fraudulent ad behavior in general accounts for billions and billions of dollars every year. If you want to put a number to it, in 2023, around $84 billion was lost to ad fraud. $84 billion a year of bot money that gets taken from advertisers and gets put into the pockets of platforms like Facebook, Google, YouTube, etc. And to companies that rely on this, divulging data about bot activity is inherently a bad thing, which is why it can be so hard to figure out the truth. But I think this helps us think about what the end game of a dead internet theory would actually be, right? If the majority of all activity on social media platforms was now turned into bot activity, what would that mean for the platforms? It would actually be a terrible thing for these platforms because they wouldn't be able to have advertisers anymore. And we're actually already observing this happening on Twitter, basically. According to one marketing firm, during the Super Bowl weekend, around 75% of ad traffic was fake. And this is one factor, amongst others, to be fair, that has led to a mass exodus of advertisers from Twitter. It provides us a little potential glimpse into the future of what it would look like if a website gets completely overrun by bots. Basically, it's a terrible thing for the platform. But there are a lot of people who don't think that this whole theory anyways is about necessarily money, right? They think it's more about power and influence and being able to control people. If you control all the bots on the website and they produce the majority of the content, then supposedly that would lead to a world where you could control public opinion by creating what seems like a variety of content, but actually all is designed to push a particular agenda or a particular set of beliefs, right? You can decide what you want those beliefs to be. But I think that line of argument suffers mainly from a misunderstanding of how misinformation in general spreads across the public. Because it seems to imply that the only thing that matters is just seeing the misinformation. And it's another case where the truth gets kind of tangled in with conspiracy. It's not a fear that comes out of nowhere, because we've seen time and time again cases where big social media platforms have real deadly impacts in the world. When you see this, it's very natural that you'd be concerned about the amount of power that these platforms wield. And the idea that just by spamming bot content, we can shift the public consciousness isn't completely untrue, because there's a phenomenon known as the illusory truth effect, which basically says that the more you hear a bit of information, the more likely you are to believe it's true. The interesting part of this effect is that it persists even if you know that the information is false beforehand. This illusory truth effect is kind of, I guess, implied to be the mechanism behind how dead internet theory would be shifting opinion, right? By effectively overloading you with generated content that leads you down a particular path. But to assume that bots on their own have that amount of impact, I think makes some mistakes. I want to talk to you about this paper I read as part of my research. It's called The Spread of True and False News Online. It's actually a pretty famous paper, I found out. And it explains some interesting detail, in my opinion, about how misinformation actually spreads on the internet. Bot accounts are actually way more likely to have fewer followers and are, in general, a lot less active than people on Twitter. In spite of this, misinformation actually spreads way quicker. You're way more likely to have a lie go viral on Twitter than you are to have a truth. So how does this happen? How does misinformation spread, even if these accounts are the least likely accounts to be able to go viral on Twitter? The factor that mainly affects how misinformation spreads isn't necessarily bot activity, but it's the way that people, particularly people who are trusted, will retweet or reshare that information. And that massively increases the likelihood of their followers actually believing the misinformation. The greater likelihood of people to retweet falsity more than the truth is what drives the spread of false news, despite network and individual factors that favor the truth. And this adds a layer of legitimacy to these false stories. This is really the problem. Yeah, like Dan says, it's like Inception. They create the seed and it runs amok. Bots' role is primarily in the early spreading of false news, but they aren't the things that really cause us to believe it. The things that cause us to believe it are not just frequency, but also hearing it from a source that we trust, right? A source that we consider reliable and a source that, might not be super good at fact checking. If you've been following the American election cycle, you've likely seen examples of false stories being spread by people who should know better, right?
They're eating the cats. They're eating the dogs.
DivJS says, falsehoods are more exciting, I guess. Yeah, for sure. That's part of it as well. There's a greater emotional salience to false news than the truth. Now, the conclusion that they reached was that human behavior contributes more to the differential spread of falsity and truth than automated robots do. The problem we have here isn't necessarily a bot problem, but rather it's just a media literacy problem. We aren't very good at identifying misinformation, and we're very good at lending legitimacy to misinformation, which causes it to actually go viral and to spread even more. And when we think of dead internet theory as this idea that bots are going to take over the internet and they're going to control the flows of money and the flows of information, then that's not really a complete account of what's going on here. Because, the flows of money are damaged when bot activity gets too high. And the flows of information, while driven in the early stages by bots, are actually amplified by humans, and they're spread by humans way more effectively than they are spread by bots. This has been reinforced by other pieces of research. And they came to the exact same conclusion, actually. Even if the bot count was halved, it wouldn't make people any smarter. And so I think we need to dedicate more effort towards improving media literacy more than anything. Despite this, the dead internet theory does definitely get to the core of something that we feel, right? It resonates with a lot of people. The internet doesn't feel alive anymore. It doesn't feel active. It doesn't feel like this escape that it once felt like. So why is that? What we actually are feeling is like a change in the experience of being online, which might not necessarily correlate directly with a change in the statistical distribution of humans versus bots online. In my opinion, the dead internet theory definitely feels true. The internet has gotten worse, but I largely put that down to a huge shift away from connection, which takes place on websites like forums and message boards and smaller social network websites, to consumption, which is something that you can do completely passively. The reason algorithmic feeds exist are not for you to become more connected to the people you know in real life, it's for you to become a greater consumer. And this shift is what has made the internet, I think, feel like it's a place which is no longer alive, because you're no longer obligated or you're no longer expected to even interact with a real person when you use the internet, which is a far cry from 15 years ago, when Facebook's original goal was to
bring people together, not push people apart.
And so in that sense, it is kind of dead, because you don't need to communicate, you don't need to interact, you just need to consume. The requirement for the amount of cognitive activity to use the internet is just slowly dropping. I don't know, man. I don't think we're there yet. They're trying really hard, but not yet. Yeah, so I think it would be foolish to say that like bots don't really pose a threat to anyone who's online. But I think the moment that we'll know the moment that we'll know that the internet is, dead in quotes, is when advertisers are actually willing to spend money, disproportionate amounts of money, on bot-generated content relative to human-generated content. And today, we're definitely not there. I'm not going to deny that the dead internet theory feels true, because it does. However, I don't think that ending it at conspiracy is that useful, because most often I see the dead internet theory end with some kind of conclusion that is along the lines of people who don't agree with me are bots. Whereas that's obviously not true. Obviously, unless you disagree with me, then you are a bot, clearly.